My name is Amelia Greene, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one to carry the weight of my family's problems on my shoulders. I've always believed it was my duty, my way of proving that I belonged, that I was an important part of this family. But that night when I walked into the house I grew up in, I knew everything was about to change forever. Looking back, I still see the kitchen, the one I once loved, the place where we gathered together for family dinners. The smell of pot roast and garlic bread filled the air, just like it had every other time we sat down for a meal. But tonight it felt different. That familiar comfort was gone. I walked into the room and instead of feeling like I was home, I felt like an outsider. The walls, once a symbol of warmth and family, now felt cold and foreign. I walked into the kitchen and there they were, my parents sitting at the table. The same parents who had raised me, supported me, or so I thought. And sitting across from them my two younger brothers, Jake and Leo. But tonight something was off. There were no smiles, no welcoming words, just an oppressive silence that hung in the air. They were looking at me, but their eyes were distant. Not the familiar, loving gaze I'd grown up with, but something colder, something more like strangers. My father, Richard, was the first to speak. He looked at me, but his eyes were distant, as though he were no longer looking at his daughter. The familiar warmth in his voice was gone, replaced by a flatness I didn't recognize. "Amelia," he said, his voice oddly formal. "We need to talk to you about something important." I could feel the unease building inside me. My parents had never spoken to me like this before. I sat down at the table trying to remain calm, though my stomach was already churning. "We've finalized our will," my father continued, his voice even, but there was something cold about it. "And we wanted you to hear it from us first." Well, I had never thought about them talking about something like that, especially when I had always been the one who kept everything running smoothly. I always assumed I would be included. I had always been the responsible one, the one who stepped up when things were tough. "We've decided that everything will go to Jake and Leo," my father said, not even looking at me now. "The house, the beach condo, all of it. We're leaving everything to them." I froze. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I couldn't process them. My mind was racing, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. Everything? For years I had paid their bills, helped Jake with his tuition, sent money when Leo needed it for his car, his life. I had done it all, believing that one day they would appreciate me, that they would see me as someone who was part of this family, not just their financial support system. Jake leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, a smug grin spreading across his face. "To put it simply, Amelia," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance, "you get nothing." The words hit me like a slap across the face. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't find the words. My chest tightened with a mixture of shock and anger. I had given so much to them, time, money, energy, and now, in the end, I was being pushed aside. I turned to my mother, Sarah, searching her face for some sign of remorse, some shred of empathy. But her eyes were distant, her hands trembling as she clutched a napkin in her lap. She didn't look at me, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but final. "Amelia, you don't need us like Jake and Leo do. You've always been independent. You've always had your career, your life. But they need more help. They're still figuring things out," she said, as though that made it all okay. As though it was the most logical thing in the world to cut me out because I had managed to stand on my own 2 feet. I felt my chest tighten as I looked at her. I had sacrificed so much, so many years of my life to make sure they were okay. But now, because I didn't need them in the same way, because I had been strong enough to build my own life, I was left with nothing. "So, because I'm successful, because I don't need your help, I'm not worth anything to you?" I asked, my voice trembling. I couldn't hold back the tears that threatened to fall. Jake laughed, his eyes full of mockery. "You always make everything about money, Amelia. No one forced you to help us. You just liked playing the martyr." Leo chuckled too, his voice light and dismissive. "Maybe you thought if you threw enough money at us, Mom and Dad would finally love you like they love us." The words stung. They were cruel. And as I looked at my parents, hoping they would step in, hoping they would defend me, there was nothing. They stayed silent. In that silence, I knew the truth. I wasn't part of their family anymore. Not the way they were. I was just their bank account, their safety net. I stood up, my legs shaky, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at them one last time, the words forming in my mind before I even realized it. "Fine," I said, my voice cold and steady. "If that's your decision, then I have one of my own." Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh, What's that? I pushed my chair back, the sound of it scraping against the floor loud in the silence. From now on, don't expect anything from me. Not money, not calls. Nothing. And with that, I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't look back. I could hear their shocked silence behind me, but it didn't matter. The door clicked shut with a finality that I could feel in my bones. The air outside was cool, but it didn't soothe the heat rising in my chest. I walked away, and in that moment I knew everything had changed. The drive home was a blur. I had no idea how I got from my parents' house back to mine. The world outside was a whirl of streetlights and passing cars, but my thoughts were somewhere else. Somewhere far, far away from all that. I didn't even bother turning on the radio. I couldn't stomach any noise, not right now. Not after what had just happened. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't even bother locking the door behind me. I just let it swing wide and walked straight to the couch, sinking into it with a heaviness that made my chest ache. I needed a moment to breathe, to think, but the more I thought about what had happened, the more I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. What had just happened? How was it possible? For years I had been the one who kept this family afloat. The one who paid the bills, who sent money when they needed it, who sacrificed so much of her own life to make sure they were okay. And now this complete betrayal. I let out a long, ragged breath. My phone vibrated on the coffee table, but I didn't bother picking it up. I knew it was my mother. She had called me twice already, but I wasn't ready to speak to her. Not yet. Not when I still had the sting of her words, her cold indifference, burning in my chest. Everything goes to Jake and Leo. I couldn't shake the words from my mind. My parents had made their decision, and there was nothing I could do to change it. They had made it clear that I was no longer needed, no longer wanted in the way I had always thought I was. The house, the beach condo, all their assets. Everything was going to my brothers. And what did I get? Nothing. I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut as though that would make the pain go away. The tears threatened to come, but I wouldn't let them. Not yet. I had cried enough already. I reached for my phone, finally picking it up. There were more missed calls. 3 from my mother, 1 from Jake, and 2 from Leo. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to hear their voices, their excuses, their lies. But I knew that I couldn't keep avoiding them forever. I tapped on the message from Jake first, his words clear and cutting. "You really think you can just walk away from this family? You're making a huge mistake, Amelia. Don't expect us to be here when you need us." I read the message twice, then let out a small laugh. A bitter, hollow laugh. This was how they saw me. A mistake. A burden they were only too happy to get rid of. I had always been the one to step in when things got tough, the one who picked up the slack, the one who made sure they never had to face the consequences of their actions. And now they were angry at me for finally standing up for myself. I set the phone down, rubbing my temples. There was no way I could go back to them. Not after this. Not after everything they had said. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else. I didn't want to go back to them. I didn't want to go back to a life of being used, being taken for granted. I didn't want to be their safety net anymore. I had always believed that family was everything. That no matter what, we had each other. But that night, everything had changed. I wasn't part of their family in the way I had thought. I was just the one they turned to when they needed money. And once I stopped giving, once I stopped playing the role they had assigned me, I was nothing to them. I stood up, pacing around the apartment. I couldn't sit still. I had to do something. Anything. I thought about all the money I had sent over the years. All the sacrifices I had made. How many times had I worked late, taken on extra shifts just to make sure they had enough? How many times had I told myself that it was worth it, that they would appreciate it eventually? How many times had I ignored my own dreams, my own desires, to take care of them? I opened my laptop, the soft hum of the machine filling the silence in the room. I pulled up my bank statement, the numbers staring back at me like a cruel reminder of everything I had done. The recurring payments to my parents. Mortgage, utilities, the monthly checks I sent to Jake and Leo every time they called complaining about their finances. There it was, all laid out in black and white. The truth was hard to swallow. I clicked on the automatic transfer section, my finger hovering over the cancel button. I hesitated just for a moment before I pressed it. The screen flashed, a small notification appearing. Recurring payments successfully stopped. A weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying for so long lifted from my chest. The anger, the bitterness, it was still there, but now there was something else too. A sense of freedom. A relief I hadn't expected. It was as though a fog had cleared, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without that crushing weight on my shoulders. But the relief didn't last long. There was still a hollow feeling inside me, an emptiness that I couldn't quite place. I had made the right decision, I knew that. But was it enough? Would it ever be enough? The phone buzzed again, but this time it was my mother. I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of anger and guilt. What was she going to say now? How could she possibly explain what had happened? How could she explain the betrayal? I let the phone ring. And then I let it ring again. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to hear her try to justify everything. I wasn't ready to hear her try to make it sound like I was the one who was wrong. The one who had messed everything up. Not when I had been the one holding everything together for so long. The truth was, I had been the one holding them up while they had never really been there for me. They had never really seen me. Not for who I was. Not for what I had done. I dropped the phone onto the couch and walked to the window. I looked out over the city, the lights of New York blinking in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so small. I didn't feel invisible. I was free. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. Every time I tried to drift off to sleep, the images of that dinner played over and over in my mind like an unending reel of horror. My parents sitting there with their cold faces, my brother's mocking smiles, and the words, they kept repeating in my head. Everything goes to Jake and Leo. You get nothing. It was like a curse, a mantra that wouldn't leave my thoughts. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with every possible outcome. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe they would come around. Maybe, just maybe, they would realize the gravity of what they had done and apologize. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I had been so blind to it all. For so many years, I had been nothing more than their fallback plan, their personal ATM, their unpaid caretaker. I had told myself that family was everything. I had convinced myself that they loved me, that they needed me. I had believed that, as long as I was there to support them financially, they would always be grateful, always appreciate me. But what I hadn't seen was that their love was conditional. Their love had always been tethered to what I could give them, to what I could provide. Without that, I was nothing. When I finally managed to fall asleep, it was only for a few hours, and the nightmares began almost immediately. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I could still hear my mother's voice, see the disappointment in her eyes. You always make everything about money. Her words had cut deeper than anything else. My mother, the one person I had always thought would stand by me, had turned her back on me when I needed her most. I had always known that my parents favored my brothers. But I never thought it would come to this. I had always been the strong one. I had always been the one to carry the burden, to make sure everything was taken care of. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own dreams just to make sure they were okay. I had sacrificed time with friends, with family, with myself. I had missed vacations, parties, events, all because I was paying their bills, covering their debts, fixing their messes. And now, after everything, they had decided that my worth was nothing. I grabbed my phone and stared at the screen. There were messages from my brothers, the usual ones, short, blunt, and full of judgment. I tapped on Jake's first. You've really done it now, Amelia. I can't believe you're acting like this. You think you're the only one who has sacrificed? You think you're the only one who's done anything for this family? You're pathetic. You've made your choice and I hope you're happy. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. There was no point. I had spent years listening to their complaints, their demands, their sense of entitlement. I had spent years thinking that if I just kept helping, if I just kept doing enough, they would see me for who I truly was. But they never did. I put the phone down and buried my face in my hands. The weight of it all crashed down on me, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. How had I let it go on this long? How had I allowed myself to be used for so many years? A small part of me wondered if I was just being dramatic. After all, they were my family. They had raised me, right? But another part of me, the part that had been silenced for so long, knew the truth. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about what I had given them. It was about respect, about love. About the fact that, no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, trying to steady myself. The apartment felt too small now, like the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't breathe in here anymore. I needed to get out to clear my head, but the truth was there was nowhere to go. No place where I could escape the feeling of betrayal that lingered like smoke in the air. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, my footsteps echoing in the empty street as I walked aimlessly, not really knowing where I was going. I wasn't even sure if I was looking for answers, or just for a distraction from the thoughts that kept circling in my mind. The city was still waking up, the streets just starting to fill with people rushing to work, the hum of life around me continuing as though nothing had changed. I walked for what felt like hours, not caring where I was going or what time it was. I just needed to get away. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't outrun the pain. I stopped at a park bench and sat down, burying my face in my hands. The tears finally came and I didn't try to stop them. For the first time in years, I let myself cry. I cried for the girl who had tried so hard to make everyone happy, the girl who had sacrificed everything and gotten nothing in return. I cried for the woman I had become, someone who had spent her entire life giving and giving, only to be tossed aside when she could no longer provide. My phone buzzed again and I wiped my tears away, trying to compose myself. It was a message from my mother this time. Amelia, I don't understand why you're doing this. Family supports each other. You've always been there for us and now you're turning your back on us when we need you the most. You've hurt us. You've hurt your father. We're not asking for much, just your support. You can't just walk away from this. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my mind. You can't just walk away from this. But that was exactly what I was doing, wasn't it? I had walked away from them the moment I stopped letting them use me, the moment I stopped being the person they could lean on whenever they needed something. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. I didn't just walk away from my family. I walked away from the version of myself I had been for so long, the version who existed only to serve them. I sat back on the bench and let out a shaky breath. My mother didn't get it. She would never get it. Not until she had to face the consequences of her own actions. She would always see me as the one who owed her, the one who was supposed to take care of everything. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had to let them figure it out on their own. I stood up, brushing the dirt off my coat, and walked away from the bench. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long time I didn't care. I was done. I woke up the next morning with a sense of weightlessness that surprised me. It was as though the anger, the frustration, and the exhaustion had been purged from my system, leaving only an unfamiliar calm. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft beams of light across my small apartment. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt the warmth of the sun on my skin without feeling the weight of my family's expectations hanging over me like a storm cloud. But today everything was different. Today I was free. Or at least, that's what I told myself as I swung my legs over the side of the bed and planted my feet on the cool hardwood floor. I hadn't planned on feeling this way. I expected to wake up feeling bitter, like a part of me was missing, like there was a hole in my chest where my family used to fit. But instead I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. I glanced at my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother. 1 from Jake. 2 from Leo. And countless text messages, all of them demanding to know why I had canceled the payments, why I had abandoned them. I had anticipated the onslaught, but that didn't make it any easier to read. I took a deep breath, silencing my phone before throwing it face down on the table. I couldn't deal with this today. Not yet. I made myself a cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table with nothing but the faint hum of the city outside and the quiet of my thoughts. The silence felt almost foreign to me, like I had spent so long drowning out my own needs in favor of everyone else's that I forgot what it was like to be alone in my own space, without the pressure to answer to someone, to be responsible for their happiness. I took a sip of my coffee and thought back to the night before, to the conversation at the dinner table that had shattered everything. It still didn't make sense to me. How could they do that? How could they so casually cut me out after all I had done for them? The sacrifices I had made for my family were endless. And yet they had decided that I wasn't enough. They had decided that I was expendable. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't the one who was wrong. I hadn't betrayed them. They had betrayed me. They had used me for so long, and now that they didn't need me anymore, they were discarding me like an old pair of shoes. And that was what hurt the most. I had spent years convincing myself that it was my responsibility, that it was what family did, take care of each other. But I had never asked for anything in return. I had never thought to question it. I just did it. But now, in the cold light of morning, I realized that I had been doing it out of a sense of duty. Duty to people who would never see me as anything other than a means to an end. The weightlessness I felt earlier was now coupled with something else. Anger. Anger that I had allowed them to take so much from me, to drain me emotionally and financially without ever once stopping to ask if I was okay. Anger that I had let my identity be shaped by their needs instead of my own desires. Anger that, no matter how hard I tried to please them, it would never be enough. I put my coffee mug down and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. People were going about their day, oblivious to the turmoil I was facing. They were all in their own little worlds, just like I had been before. And maybe that was what I needed to do, focus on my world. I had spent so many years trying to fix everyone else's problems that I had lost sight of my own. I had to change that. I had to break free from the chains I had allowed them to bind me with. I grabbed my phone again, checking the messages from my family. My mother had sent another text, this time sounding a little more desperate. "Amelia, I don't understand. Please just talk to us. We can't do this without you. Your father is getting worse and Leo and Jake are struggling. You're the only one who can fix this. We need you." The words stung, but I didn't let them sway me. They always said they needed me, but when was the last time they truly needed me for anything other than money? When had they ever asked how I was doing, how I felt, if I needed help? No, they needed me for one thing and one thing only, to solve their problems. But I couldn't solve their problems anymore. I couldn't keep giving when I had nothing left to give. I took a deep breath, put my phone on silent and set it down on the counter. I didn't need to see it, not right now. I needed to focus on myself, to figure out what I needed. The truth was, I didn't know where to start. I had spent so much of my life being the responsible one, the one who kept everything running smoothly, that I had no idea what it was like to be the one who didn't have to worry about everyone else. I had no idea what it was like to take care of me. But that's exactly what I was going to do. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The shock of it was enough to snap me out of my reverie. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. There was a woman looking back at me, someone who had been through hell and come out the other side stronger. Someone who had made mistakes, who had been naive, but who had learned from them. A woman who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself anymore. I was done being everyone else's savior. I was done being the one who had to carry all the weight. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. A feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in far too long. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not a smile of relief, not a smile of resignation, but a smile of determination. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a notebook. I needed a plan. I needed to take control of my life again. I needed to rebuild. I started writing. Step 1. Find out what I want. Step 2. Start focusing on my own career. Step 3. Cut off financial support for good. Step 4. Set boundaries, stick to them and don't feel guilty about it. Step 5. Reconnect with friends, start living for myself. Felt good to write it down. Felt good to have a plan. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be times when I would feel weak, when I would second-guess myself. But the truth was, I couldn't go back. I couldn't keep living my life for them. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the window again, this time feeling a sense of power in my chest. I wasn't just a financial lifeline for my family. I was Amelia Greene, and I had every right to live my life the way I wanted. And the first step toward that freedom started today. It had been 3 days since I made the decision to sever ties with my family. And though I felt a sense of peace, I also knew the storm was far from over. My phone had remained silent for the most part, aside from the occasional text or missed call which I ignored. But I knew my mother, my brothers, especially Jake, wouldn't take this lying down. It was only a matter of time before they came after me, trying to force me back into the role I had so desperately fought to escape. I tried not to think about it too much. I knew the right thing was to keep moving forward. I had made my decision and I couldn't afford to look back. But in the quiet moments when the noise of the world outside died down, I couldn't help but wonder what was going on in their heads. Were they angry? Were they sad? Did they even care? I had spent so much of my life living for them, pouring my heart and soul into a family that had never really seen me, never really appreciated me. And yet, in the silence, I found myself questioning, did I even know who I was without them? The ringing phone snapped me out of my thoughts. I looked at the screen, my pulse quickening as I saw my mother's name. I had been expecting this. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but then in an instant I decided I was done running. I answered the call. "Amelia," my mother's voice came through, shaky and uncertain. "We need to talk. Please." I sat up straighter, my back stiffening. This wasn't going to be easy. "What is it, Mom?" There was a long pause on the other end. I don't understand why you're doing this. We need you. Your father is barely holding it together, and Jake and Leo, they're struggling, Amelia. You're the only one who can fix this. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. They always turned to me when things got hard, and they always did it in the same way, as if I were the one responsible for holding the entire family together. Mom, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil I was feeling, I can't keep doing this. I've given everything I have to you all for years, and it's never been enough. I can't keep being the one who holds everything up. I've taken care of you, but now it's time for me to take care of myself. I could hear her soft, choked sob on the other end of the line. Amelia, please don't do this. You can't just walk away from us. Family is supposed to support each other. You can't leave us when we need you the most. I felt a sharp pang in my chest at her words, but I didn't let it sway me. I have supported you, Mom. I've supported you for years. But that's not enough for you, is it? You only care about me when I'm giving you something. I'm not an A-team. I'm not your safety net anymore. There was a long silence, and then I heard her voice break. You're being selfish, Amelia. You're abandoning us when we need you the most. We're struggling, and you're just going to turn your back on us. I took a deep breath. No, Mom. I'm not turning my back on you. I'm turning my back on the version of myself that you've all created, one that's constantly sacrificing for everyone else and never getting anything in return. I deserve more than that. She didn't answer right away, and I knew she was struggling with my words. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing, shaky and uncertain. Finally, she spoke again, her voice soft and resigned. I don't know who you are anymore, Amelia. I thought you were the one who always took care of us. But now I don't know. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. Not now. You don't have to understand, Mom. But I need you to respect my decision. I'm not the person you want me to be anymore. I'm me. Just me. The line went silent for what felt like an eternity, and then with a sigh she spoke one last time. I can't believe you're doing this. Her voice cracked. You've hurt us, Amelia. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I pushed it down. I didn't hurt you, Mom. You hurt me. But I'm done being hurt. I hung up before she could say anything else, and the silence that followed was deafening. I set the phone down on the table and sat there motionless. The weight of the conversation pressed down on me, but there was a strange sense of finality to it, too. I had said what I needed to say. I had done what I needed to do. And now I could move forward. But as the day wore on, the consequences of my decision began to sink in. I was walking down the street later that afternoon when my phone rang again. This time it was Jake. I let it ring for a moment before answering, my heart pounding in my chest. Amelia. His voice came through cold and flat. You've made a big mistake. I didn't say anything at first. I was still processing the call with Mom. But I knew this conversation wouldn't be any better. You don't get to make decisions for everyone else, Jake continued, his tone sharp. We're all struggling and you just decide to walk away. What, you think you can just cut us off and leave us to fend for ourselves? You're being ridiculous. Jake, I said, my voice firm, I've been there for you for so long and I'm done. I've given you everything I have and it's never been enough. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. I'm not your safety net. You think we don't know what you've done for us? Jake spat. You think we're just going to let you walk away without consequences? I could feel my pulse quicken as his words hit me like a slap. What do you mean by consequences, Jake? Don't play dumb, Amelia, he snapped. We're family, and if you think you can just shut us out and walk away without facing the consequences, you're wrong. This isn't over. The line went dead before I could respond. And for the first time I allowed myself to think about the implications of what I had done. I had expected their anger, but I hadn't expected the threat that lingered in the air. I had cut them off, completely. There was no going back. And though I knew it was the right thing to do, part of me wondered, how far would they go to make me regret it? The truth was, I was scared. Scared of what they might do. Scared of how they would react. But deep down I knew this was the only way to truly break free. I couldn't live my life shackled to their expectations any longer. It was time to put myself first. But even as I told myself that, the phone rang again. This time it was Leo. I hesitated before answering, already bracing myself for the anger, the accusations. Amelia. His voice was quiet, almost like he was trying to hold back emotion. What the hell are you doing? You can't just do this. You're abandoning us and we can't survive without you. You don't know how hard it's been. Why are you being so selfish? I sat down on the nearest bench, the weight of his words crashing over me. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he had never once thought about how I was struggling, but I couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I whispered, I'm not abandoning you, Leo. I'm letting you face the consequences of your actions, just like I had to face the consequences of mine. You can't keep relying on me forever. I didn't ask you to be the one who fixed everything, Leo replied, his voice faltering. You always made it seem like it was your responsibility, but it's not fair. You can't just leave us like this. I'm not leaving you, I said, finally finding my voice. I'm stepping away. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I can't carry you anymore. And with that, I ended the call. The city felt different now. The sound of the traffic, the hustle and bustle of the crowds, all of it seemed muted in the background, almost as if the world was carrying on without me. Or maybe it was me who was finally learning how to ignore the noise. It had been a week since I had made the decision to walk away from my family, and though the tension and the guilt weighed heavily on me, something else had settled in its place. Peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came with closure, because there was no closure. I hadn't ended the relationship with my family on my terms. It was messy, emotional, and harsh, but it was still a form of peace. And that was something I hadn't known in years. The first few days after I severed the ties had been the hardest. The calls, the texts, the guilt trips, all of it. But as the days stretched on, I began to realize that I wasn't just getting used to the silence. I was thriving in it. I no longer had to wake up in the middle of the night with the constant thought of my family's financial problems gnawing at me. I wasn't constantly looking at my phone, wondering when I would get another desperate plea for help. For the first time in a long time, I was living for me. It wasn't easy. The emotional toll was still there, especially when I would think about my parents. I wondered if they missed me. But then I reminded myself of the reality. They had never really seen me. Not the way I needed them to. I had been their crutch, the one they leaned on whenever they needed something. But when I needed them, when I needed to feel seen, they were never there. I looked out of my apartment window, watching the city stretch before me, the skyline dotted with towering buildings, and felt a strange sense of empowerment. This city had always been a reminder of what I was working toward, but now it felt like a blank canvas. I had the power to choose how to fill it. I was ready to start fresh. I was ready to rediscover who I was without the weight of my family's expectations hanging over me. I had spent so many years being the person everyone else needed me to be, but now it was time to become the person I had always wanted to be. That afternoon I went into work. The office was buzzing with the usual energy. People were running around, phones ringing, laptops clattering. But this time I didn't feel overwhelmed by it all. For the first time in a while, I felt like I belonged there. I was good at my job. I always had been. I had worked hard to get where I was, and for the first time I didn't feel guilty about putting myself first. I sat down at my desk, fired up my computer, and dove into the projects I had been putting off for months. Work had always been my escape. It was where I felt in control, where I could lose myself in the tasks at hand and forget about the rest of the world. Today, though, it felt different. It felt like I was not only regaining control of my career but also my life. I started a new project that I had been thinking about for a while. Something that had always been in the back of my mind but never had the time to nurture. I started researching new ideas, new ways to improve my department's workflow, ways I could add value to my team. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. The only validation I needed was my own. I'd forgotten how good it felt to work without the burden of guilt dragging me down. Without the constant reminder of my family's financial instability, the endless phone calls asking for help, the expectation that I would always drop everything to pick up the pieces. Now I had the mental space to think creatively, to push myself further. That night after work I decided to do something for myself. I hadn't realized how much I'd been missing it until that moment. I hadn't really had time to think about my own interests or desires in so long. The truth was I had buried them. There had been no time for hobbies, no time for passions. My life had revolved around everyone else. But now, for the first time, I had the chance to rediscover who I was outside of the role I had been playing. I signed up for a photography class. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but it had always taken a backseat to my responsibilities. I had loved taking photos when I was younger, but somewhere along the way I had abandoned it, telling myself there was no time for it. But now, Now I was going to make time. The next few days passed in a blur of new beginnings. I threw myself into my work, my photography class, and for the first time in years, my own well-being. I started exercising again, something I had let slip in the chaos of taking care of everyone else. I began cooking for myself, trying new recipes and savoring the time I spent in my kitchen. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Joy. Real joy. As I continued to build this new life for myself, I received an email from my boss, inviting me to a meeting. When I walked into the office that day, my stomach fluttered with nerves. I hadn't been expecting anything, but as the meeting went on, I realized that the project I had been working on had caught the attention of the higher-ups. They wanted to give me more responsibility. They wanted me to take on a leadership role in the company. For the first time, I felt like I deserved it. I wasn't just receiving this promotion because I had been the responsible one, the reliable one who never said no. I was getting it because I had worked hard and because I had something to offer. It wasn't a reward for being someone else's crutch. It was a reward for being me. When the meeting ended, I walked out of the room with a smile on my face. I felt proud of myself, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I had worked hard for this. I had earned it. And the best part was that I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't doing it to prove anything to my family or to anyone else in my life. I was doing it because I deserved it. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sun set over the city. The skyline was bathed in a soft golden light, and for the first time I felt truly at peace. I had spent so many years running on empty, trying to fix everyone else's problems, trying to make everyone else happy. But now I was living for myself. I was taking control of my life, and it felt like I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. I had broken free from the chains that had bound me, and though the journey wasn't easy, it was worth it. I was no longer just the daughter, the sister, the caretaker. I was Amelia Greene, a woman in control of her own destiny. And the future? It was mine to shape. It's funny how life has a way of knocking you off course only to set you back on the path you were meant to walk. A few weeks had passed since I made the conscious decision to step away from my family. Each day brought a new challenge, but with each challenge I felt myself growing stronger, more rooted in the person I was becoming. I had been carving out space for myself, rediscovering old passions, and embracing the freedom I had fought so hard for. But even as I relished in my newfound independence, there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't ignore, something that tugged at my heart in quiet moments. A part of me, no matter how hard I tried to push it aside, was still connected to my family. It was in the little things that I felt the absence. Like when I would come home after a long day and find myself reaching for my phone to check in with my mom, only to remember that I couldn't. Or when I saw a post on social media about a family gathering, and the ache of not being there with them lingered in the pit of my stomach. I had cut the ties, but it didn't make the hurt go away. And that's what I didn't anticipate, the emotional complexity of severing ties with the people you've spent your entire life trying to please. But I was learning to live with it. I had to. One evening, I was sitting in my apartment enjoying a cup of tea and the soft glow of the city lights when my phone rang. The name on the screen sent a jolt through me. It was Aunt Linda. The one person in the family who had always been a quiet supporter of mine, someone who never expected anything from me and had always been genuinely kind. She was the person who'd made me laugh when I was younger, who had treated me like I mattered long before I had the courage to see it. I hesitated, but I answered the call. Amelia, her voice was soft and warm as always. Hi honey. How are you? For a second I was unsure how to respond. The truth was I was good. Better than I had been in years. But that didn't feel like an answer I could give someone in my family who had been a silent witness to all the chaos. I'm adjusting. It's been a big change. She paused and I could almost hear her processing what I'd said. I know, darling. And I understand why you needed to do what you did. But I wanted to talk to you about something if you're open to it. I took a deep breath, curiosity creeping in. Of course. What's going on? I've been hearing some things, she began, her voice taking on a gentle tone. About your parents and Jake and Leo. It's been hard on them, Amelia. They're struggling with your decision. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had expected something like this. The guilt that had been lingering around the edges of my newfound peace crept back up. I know, I said quietly. I can't deny that. But they've been using me for so long, Aunt Linda. I didn't have a choice. They made me feel like I had to do everything for them, and now that I've stopped, they don't know how to handle it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could tell Aunt Linda was thinking carefully about her next words. I understand, sweetie. I do. But sometimes it's not about right or wrong. It's about what's in our hearts. They need you, Amelia. But more than that, I think they miss you. They miss the version of you that was always there, even when they didn't deserve it. Her words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so much time justifying my decisions, so much energy convincing myself that I was doing the right thing, that I hadn't stopped to think about how they might truly feel. Not just because I had stopped helping, but because I had stopped being the person I had been for so long. I've been so angry at them, I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. I felt so betrayed. And I know that I'm the one who needed to set boundaries, but I don't know if I can ever get over what they did. How they just tossed me aside once they didn't need me. Amelia, Aunt Linda said gently, anger is natural. It's a part of healing. But you also need to remember that while you were giving and giving, your family didn't see the consequences of their actions. They didn't see how much it was costing you. But that doesn't mean they don't love you. Maybe they just don't know how to show it right now. A sharp breath caught in my throat. He was right. I had spent so long trying to earn their love through actions, through sacrifice, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself if they even knew how to love me in return. I had put myself in a position where I was their provider, their caretaker, and somewhere along the way I had forgotten how to be their daughter. But I can't go back, I said, the finality in my voice growing. Not to how it was. I can't just let them keep taking from me without any appreciation. I won't go back to being the one who sacrifices everything. I'm not asking you to go back, Amelia, she replied, her voice soft yet firm. I'm asking you to find a way to reconnect. To open your heart to healing, not just for them but for you too. Because holding on to this anger, this resentment, it's only going to keep you stuck. And I don't want that for you. You deserve peace, you deserve to be seen for who you are, not just what you can give. Her words echoed in my mind long after I hung up. Aunt Linda had always been a voice of reason in the storm. But this time she was offering me something I hadn't realized I needed. Permission to heal. Permission to rebuild not just my relationship with my family, but my relationship with myself. I had spent so long trying to prove my worth to them, to everyone, that I had forgotten what it meant to simply be me. I had lost sight of my own needs, my own desires, my own worth beyond what I could provide. And now Aunt Linda was asking me to let go of the past, to stop clinging to the hurt, to stop defining myself by their rejection. She was asking me to live. That night, I sat down with my journal and started writing. I hadn't written in years, not for myself anyway. My thoughts had always been clouded by responsibility, by the constant pressure to perform, to be the perfect daughter, sister, and caretaker. But now there was space. There was room to breathe. So I wrote. I am more than what I can give. I am enough just as I am. I repeated the words in my head as I wrote them down, almost like a mantra. I had forgotten that I deserved love, not because of what I could offer but because I was worthy of it. I had spent so long thinking that love was something I had to earn that I had neglected the most important truth of all. Love was something I had to give to myself first. As I wrote, a sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't a magic fix, and it certainly wasn't the end of my healing process, but it was a step. I was finally taking back my life. And, maybe for the first time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I picked up the phone and sent a message to Aunt Linda. Thank you. I needed to hear that more than you know. As the days passed, I began to let go of the anger slowly but surely. I couldn't erase the past, nor would I ever forget the pain. But I could choose to forgive. I could choose to heal. And in doing so, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about condoning their actions. It was about freeing myself from the weight of their mistakes. I decided to reach out to my family. Not because I owed them anything, but because I owed myself the chance to move forward without the bitterness weighing me down. It wasn't easy. I didn't know what to expect when I reached out to my mother, but I couldn't avoid it forever. The conversation wasn't perfect. It wasn't some tear-filled reconciliation. But it was a start. We need to talk, Amelia, she said when I called. I want to understand. I don't want to lose you. And as I listened to her, I realized something profound. I wasn't the only one who had been hurt. They had lost their way too. They didn't know how to love me the way I needed them to. But maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of a new chapter. It was a small step, but it was enough. And that was all I needed. The weight of the past few weeks had been both heavy and liberating. Each day I walked further away from the life I had known, the life that had been suffocating me for years. I was making peace with my decisions one step at a time, but there was still something lingering in my chest, something I couldn't ignore. The finality of it all. I had chosen to walk away from my family, from everything I had believed in for so long. And although part of me felt empowered by that decision, another part of me still felt the sting of loss. I had known this wouldn't be easy, but I hadn't realized how much it would hurt. The phone call from my mother a few days ago had left me with more questions than answers. She had apologized in her own way, but there was an underlying sense of guilt, manipulation, of her still trying to place the blame on me. She couldn't understand why I had done what I did, and even though I had explained it as clearly as I could, it still felt like she wasn't truly hearing me. Like she was waiting for me to come back to fix things, to be the person she expected me to be. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't fall into that familiar pattern of being the one to make everything right, the one who picked up the pieces every time they fell apart. And still the guilt clung to me. It wasn't about whether or not I was doing the right thing anymore. It was about whether I was strong enough to live with the fallout. I had cut them off. I had broken the chain that had bound me to them for so long, and now I had to deal with the consequences. The silence between us was deafening, and as I sat in my apartment looking out at the city, I wondered what my next move would be. I had done the hard part, walking away. But now I had to live with it. That evening I received another message from Jake. I hadn't heard from him in a few days, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the next wave of anger came crashing down. I opened the message, bracing myself. "You think you've won, Amelia? You think cutting us off like this is going to make everything better? You're selfish and you've broken this family. I hope you can live with that." I read the message twice, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the realization that he still didn't get it. He still didn't understand why I had to do this, why I couldn't keep enabling them. I had given him everything and still he couldn't see beyond his own anger. Part of me wanted to respond, to defend myself. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. He wasn't listening. None of them were. They were too caught up in their own world to see mine. I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The silence in the apartment felt heavier now, as though I was surrounded by the ghosts of everything I had left behind. I missed them, I really did. But I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I stood up, walking toward the door with hesitant steps. Who could it be? I hadn't been expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I was met with the last person I expected to see. My father. His face was drawn, his shoulders slumped as though the weight of the world was on him. He looked different, older somehow, as if the years had caught up with him in the time we had been apart. For a moment I didn't know what to say. What could I say? After everything that had happened, after everything he and my mother had put me through, I wasn't sure there was anything left to say. "Amelia," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without saying a word, still unsure of how to react. He walked in slowly, his eyes scanning the apartment as though trying to make sense of the space that had once been filled with so much noise, so much chaos. We stood in silence for a few moments before he spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about what happened. I don't understand it, but I think I'm starting to." I folded my arms across my chest, feeling the tension in my body. I wasn't sure I was ready for this conversation. I wasn't sure I was ready to face him, not after everything that had gone wrong between us. "You don't have to understand it, Dad," I said, my voice low. "I've told you why I had to do it. You weren't listening. None of you were." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I should have listened. I should have seen what you were going through. But I didn't. I took you for granted. I thought you would always be there, and I was wrong." His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long I had wanted to hear this from him. I had wanted to hear him admit that he had failed me, that he had been blind to the pain I had been carrying. But now that I was hearing it, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt empty. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with his apology. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's too late for apologies, Dad. You can't take back all the years of using me, of expecting me to fix everything. You can't undo that." He looked down at the floor, the weight of my words clearly sinking in. "I know," he said softly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head, feeling a surge of emotion I couldn't quite explain. You didn't mean to, but you did. You and Mom both. You made me feel like I was nothing but a tool to fix your problems. You didn't care about me. Not really. His eyes filled with regret, but there was something else in them too. Something I couldn't quite place. I know we messed up, Amelia. I can't change the past, but I want to try to fix it. If you'll let me. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him it was too late. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. I don't know if I can go back, Dad, I said, my voice shaky. I've spent so many years trying to make you proud, trying to fix everything. But now I have to take care of myself. He nodded, his face filled with sorrow. I understand. And I'm not asking you to come back. I just want you to know that I'm here and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time I saw the man who had raised me. Not the man who had used me, not the man who had failed me, but the man who had been my father. And in that moment I realized something. I didn't need him to fix everything. I didn't need his approval. What I needed was to be able to move on without the burden of the past hanging over me. I gave him a small nod. I don't know what the future holds, Dad. But I can't keep carrying this weight anymore. I need to be free. And that means I need to let go. He stood up slowly, as though he were afraid of what I might say next. I understand, Amelia. I truly do. As he turned to leave, I felt the weight of the finality of it all settle in. This was it. The break I had been avoiding, the closure I hadn't realized I needed. I watched him walk out the door, and for the first time I didn't feel sad. I felt lighter. The days after the final break felt like a blur, a mixture of liberation and exhaustion. The weight I had carried for so long had finally been lifted, but there was something else that came with it. A realization that the price of freedom was steep. It wasn't just about walking away from my family or cutting off the ties that had bound me for so many years. No, the price of freedom was the loneliness that came with it. I had expected it, of course. How could I not? I had spent years sacrificing my happiness, my identity, and my peace of mind for a family that had never truly seen me. I had known that the moment I made the decision to leave, I would have to face the consequences. But knowing something and living it were two entirely different things. In the weeks that followed my confrontation with my father, I found myself alone with my thoughts more than I cared to admit. The silence in my apartment was deafening at times. No more late-night phone calls from my mother. No more text from Jake asking for money or Leo complaining about his latest predicament. At first, the quiet was a relief. But then the isolation set in. I hadn't realized how much of my life had revolved around their needs, their expectations. I had always been the one who kept everything together, who made sure everyone else was okay. And now that I had stopped, now that I had chosen to take care of myself, I was left with nothing but the echo of my own voice. I spent hours at work, throwing myself into my projects with a focus that I hadn't had in years. I couldn't remember the last time I had been this productive. Without the constant distractions of family drama, I was able to dive deeper into my work than I ever had before. But even as I excelled in my career, there was a nagging emptiness inside of me. It was like I was running on autopilot, checking off tasks one by one, but never feeling truly fulfilled. I had taken the first steps toward rebuilding my life, but the truth was I didn't know where to go from here. I didn't know who I was without the role I had played for so long. I had spent my whole life being someone else's caretaker, someone else's problem solver. And now I was left with the daunting task of finding myself. It was a Saturday afternoon when I decided to leave my apartment and go for a walk. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get out of my own head for a while. The city was bustling with energy as always, but this time it felt distant. I walked aimlessly, passing by shops and restaurants, but nothing really registered. It was as though I was a ghost walking through a world that no longer felt like mine. I wandered through a park, sitting on a bench by the fountain. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks was soothing, but it didn't ease the weight that still sat heavily on my chest. I had broken free from the chains of my family, but in doing so I had isolated myself. I had cut myself off from everything I had ever known. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out reluctantly. I wasn't expecting any good news, but a part of me still hoped. There was a message from Aunt Linda. I hadn't heard from her in a while, and I was surprised to see her name pop up on the screen. Amelia, I know you're probably not ready to talk, but I've been thinking a lot about you. I just wanted to check in. I know you've made your decision, but I hope you know that you're not alone. You're always welcome to come back and visit if you ever feel ready. Take care of yourself, darling. I love you." I stared at the message, feeling a lump form in my throat. Aunt Linda had always been the one person in my family who truly saw me. The one person who never expected anything from me, who never made me feel like I was just a source of financial support. But now, even her love seemed like a distant memory. The ache of her words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't ready to face my family again. I wasn't sure I ever would be. But the fact that Aunt Linda was reaching out, trying to bridge the gap I had created, made me wonder if maybe I had taken things too far. Maybe I had cut them off too completely. But then I reminded myself of the price I had paid for freedom. The price of finally standing up for myself, of finally saying no to the endless demands and expectations. The price of not allowing myself to be their emotional punching bag anymore. I couldn't go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I stood up from the bench and made my way back to my apartment, my mind swirling with thoughts I couldn't quite pin down. When I arrived back home, I sat down at my desk, staring blankly at the screen. I had become so focused on the idea of reclaiming my life that I hadn't stopped to think about what that life would actually look like. I had spent so long trying to solve everyone else's problems that I had never learned how to solve my own. That evening, I decided to reach out to someone who could help me figure this out. I called Emma, a friend I had made during my photography class. She was the first person in a long time who had made me feel like I wasn't just someone's caretaker. She saw me for who I was, not for what I could give her. "Hey Amelia. How are you?" She answered the phone cheerfully. "I'm good," I said, though I didn't really feel that way. "I've been thinking a lot, actually. About my life, and where I'm going from here." She paused for a moment, sensing the uncertainty in my voice. "Want to talk about it?" I took a deep breath, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I'm not sure I know where to begin. I've spent so long being what everyone else needed me to be, that now I don't know what it means to just be me. I don't know who I am without my family, without the role I played in their lives. Emma was quiet for a moment and then she spoke softly but firmly. "Amelia, you've been through a lot. It's okay not to have all the answers. But what you're doing right now, taking care of yourself, standing up for yourself, that's huge. It's the first step toward finding who you really are. And that's going to take time. But it's also going to be worth it." I let her words sink in, realizing that she was right. I had been so focused on the idea of getting my life back, of fixing everything, that I hadn't given myself permission to just be. I didn't need to have all the answers right now. I didn't need to have everything figured out. I just needed to let myself breathe. The next few weeks were a blur of self-reflection and small steps forward. I threw myself into my work, allowing myself to focus on my career without the distractions of family drama. I continued taking my photography class, finding solace in capturing the world through a different lens. I went to yoga, took long walks, and started cooking meals for myself again. Meals I actually enjoyed instead of just meals I could eat in a hurry. But the loneliness still crept in. I spent a lot of nights curled up on the couch, watching movies, reading books, trying to fill the void that my family had left behind. I still missed them in my own way. The idea of what we could have been had things turned out differently. But I also knew something else. That they had never truly been the family I had wanted them to be. They had been a family built on expectations, on financial dependency, and on manipulation. I had learned the hard way that love wasn't about what you could give. It was about who you were. And for the first time in a long time, I was learning how to love myself for who I was, not for what I could provide. One morning, as I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee in hand, I received a message from my father. "I don't know what to say, Amelia. I've been thinking about what you said and I don't know how to fix things. But I want to try. Please, let me know if you're open to talking again. I miss you." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something deep inside. Something like hope. Maybe we could rebuild. Maybe it would take time. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. But for now, I knew I had to focus on me. I wasn't ready to go back, but I was ready to move forward. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. And that was worth more than anything else. The months following my decision to walk away from my family were filled with both peace and uncertainty. In the beginning, I hadn't been sure I could go through with it, cutting ties with the people who had been my entire world for so long. But now, months later, I could say with certainty that it had been the right choice. It wasn't easy. It wasn't without pain. But I was living for me now, and that made all the difference. I had spent years putting my family's needs ahead of my own, thinking that if I just kept giving, if I kept sacrificing, eventually I would earn their love and appreciation. But in the end, it was only when I stopped giving that I realized I didn't need their approval to be worthy. I didn't need to fix their problems to feel like I mattered. I had to matter to myself first. My apartment had become a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, where I could finally be myself without the constant pressure of other people's expectations. It was mine, truly mine, and I had worked hard to create a life that was about me, not about what I could do for others. I still thought about my family, about my mom, my dad, and my brothers. But those thoughts no longer carried the same weight. I no longer felt like I had to fix things, like I had to carry their burdens on my shoulders. I had given them enough. It was time for them to find their own way, just as I had done. My work had become more fulfilling. I had been promoted, and for the first time, it felt like it wasn't just a reward for being the responsible one, or the reliable one, but for the hard work and creativity I had put into my job. I had started contributing ideas that were heard, not because I was the family's financial safety net, but because I had something valuable to offer. I wasn't just seen as someone who kept things afloat. I was seen as a leader, a creator. And beyond my work, I had started living for myself in ways I had never allowed before. I had returned to photography, something I had always loved but put aside for years. I bought a new camera and started going out to capture the city. The vibrant streets, the quiet moments, the things that once made me feel alive but had been buried beneath years of responsibility. One weekend, I went on a solo trip to the beach. It had been years since I had taken a vacation just for me, and the thought of it filled me with both excitement and trepidation. Could I really spend time alone without the need to fill the silence with my family's problems or my own sense of obligation? The beach was the perfect escape. I spent the days walking along the shore, breathing in the salty air, letting the sound of the waves wash over me. I took photos of the sunset, the waves crashing against the rocks, the seagulls flying overhead. I sat in the sand and simply was letting the world move around me while I finally stopped moving for once. It was a rare moment of stillness, and in that stillness I realized something. I had been so busy running to help everyone else that I had forgotten how to be present in my own life. I had never been happier to be alone. There was no expectation, no demand for my attention. There was only me and the peace I had spent so long searching for. When I returned from the beach, I found myself settling into a routine I had never allowed before. I took time for myself, not just to work but to enjoy life. I spent evenings with friends, going out for dinner or just having long conversations over coffee. I joined a yoga class and started taking better care of my health, not because I felt like I had to, but because I deserved it. I spent more time with Aunt Linda, who had been my anchor throughout all of this. Her unconditional support had meant the world to me, and I realized how lucky I was to have someone who truly understood me. She was my reminder that family didn't have to be blood. It was the people who loved you for who you were, not for what you could give them. But despite all the progress I had made, the one question that lingered in my mind was, would I ever go back to my family? The answer was complicated. I hadn't heard from them much since the day my father had come to my apartment, and the few conversations I'd had since then had been strained. My mother had called a couple of times, but every conversation felt like an attempt to convince me that everything could go back to the way it had been. She didn't understand why I had done what I did, and every time we spoke I felt the old guilt creeping back in. She wanted me to return to the role I had played for so long, but I knew I could never go back to that. It wasn't that I didn't love them. I did. I always would. But I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for their approval, for their comfort. I couldn't go back to being the person they needed me to be. And that was something I had to accept, no matter how painful it was. But I also knew I couldn't live my life in isolation. My family had been a part of me for so long, and despite everything I still cared about them. Maybe someday we could rebuild what had been broken. But that couldn't happen until they understood that I wasn't just a provider for them. I was a person with my own needs, my own dreams, my own life. And until they saw me that way, I wasn't sure if we could ever truly heal. So, for now, I focused on the life I had built for myself. I poured my energy into my work, my hobbies, my friendships. I allowed myself to heal, to rediscover who I was, and in doing so, I learned something invaluable. I didn't need anyone's permission to live my life. I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. I was enough on my own. The weeks turned into months, and as the seasons changed, I felt myself becoming more and more comfortable in my own skin. I had reclaimed my life. I had taken back my happiness. And as I stood on my balcony one evening watching the city lights twinkle below me, I finally understood what it meant to live for myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn love. I wasn't trying to fix things. I was simply living. And that, in and of itself, was the greatest freedom I could have ever hoped for.